Jobless Americans in more than 21 states are receiving an additional $300 in unemployment benefits weekly under an executive order by President Trump. But the funding has come to an end in 9 states, while states like Florida and Idaho have informed unemployment beneficiaries they won't receive the $300 for the full 6 weeks.
Meanwhile, at least 8 other states, including Wisconsin, which runs out of money at the end of next month, are still waiting for FEMA approval, so they've never been able to get it going in the first place. But with just $2.5 billion left out of the $44 billion for extra unemployment benefits from FEMA, uncertainty looms, to say the least. Washington Post economics reporter Jeffrey Stein joins us from Wisconsin to share what he knows about that and work on a potential stimulus package. Jeff, it's great to see you.
Good to be back on. Thank you, guys.
Let me actually start with the breaking news this morning. We got the latest new jobless claims, and basically, the decline in new jobless claims has stopped, right? So basically the same number of new unemployment claims last week as the week before. That's got to be a troubling sign here.
It's actually even a little worse than that. It's not only plateauing. There's actually been an increase in unemployment claims in each of the last 3 weeks consecutively. And you pair that with new data we got from Yelp showing a continued surge in the number of small businesses that are permanently closing. That number has actually not really fallen at all at any point in the last 6 months. It's continued to go up. 100,000 small businesses permanently closing now. That's going to ripple throughout the economy. You were talking restaurants, hotels, other small businesses particularly reliant on customers who are there in person, movie theaters, that kind of thing. So we're seeing the permanent scarring of huge sectors of the American economy at a time when federal support is either evaporating, as you mentioned, or very unlikely to arrive. Talks on Capitol Hill have broken down. We can get into that, but it's really not looking good.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, I think that's kind of where I was going, which is that I saw almost immediately with RBG's death, I was like, oh, it's truly over. And it was probably over in terms of an economic recovery or stimulus package before that, but it was like the final nail for any hope of this before Election Day. Does that kind of track with what your reporting shows?
There's been some talk on Capitol Hill, and I think it might just be sort of wishful thinking fantasy more than anything, but a lot of the Democrats and even some of the Republicans have continually viewed Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, as the main obstacle to a bipartisan deal. Congress was able to strike several deals with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin when he was the president's main negotiator with Capitol Hill. The thinking, some of the theorizing goes, is that with Meadows consumed with the Supreme Court situation, he's a ideological conservative who is very invested and very involved with the fight over the next Supreme Court justice, that maybe him being sidelined will give negotiators room to cut a deal. But I think, as your viewers know from watching me do this myself repeatedly over and over on this very program, people will find silver linings when there really are none, and I think that might be the case of one of them. All other indications suggest that Pelosi is not very eager to give President a big victory right before the election. The president continues to say that Pelosi's demands for state and local municipalities are ridiculous and over the top. Pelosi lowered her ask to $2.2 trillion, but we really haven't seen Republicans be willing to go north of $1.5 trillion. And it's very hard to imagine that, especially as Republicans try to unify their caucus for this very difficult Supreme Court fight, Mitch McConnell would be willing to risk splicing his membership in two over something like aid for state and local governments. We did see some bipartisan movement with the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus came out with a sort of centrist idea that how this could get done. But since then, there was a lot of talk that maybe that would get momentum, and it sort of just fizzled out. All of the energy has gone to the Supreme Court fight, but even as that's happened, that hasn't meant that the tens of millions of Americans in dire straits are doing any better.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah,
right.
Indeed. And what is the impact of the fact that, the $600 unemployment plus up expired a while ago? What the president did with his executive order was patchy. Some states, they got something. Some states it didn't. It now all is basically expiring. What's the impact of that?
Well, Goldman Sachs announced just this morning that they're having their growth estimate for the fourth quarter of this year from 6% to 3%.
Wow.
a lot of people will say, that GDP numbers are not that important and kind of overstated by, mainstream reporters such as myself. But, even in the terms of the debate that we're talking about, people who care about that should be worried. And you layer on top of that the obvious suffering for people who are, we've seen, hunger is at an unbelievable high relative to pre-pandemic. The jobless claims just this week, barely warrant a major news story at this point. And yet at the same time, they are higher than at any point during the Great Recession. And think about the amount of freak out, rightly, that entailed. I'm not sure what the political consequences will be. We'll have to see. The president's approval numbers are still not that good, and he continues to trail Joe Biden in many key states, and it's imperiled economically.
Jeff, what does your on-the-ground reporting tell you just about how average Americans are feeling right now?
Well, it's the American public. It's very hard when you go out there and you interview people one by one. People have such a diverse range of beliefs. But a lot of people are really hurting. And I've been spending the week talking to farmers. A lot of farmers are in very dire straits. They've received a lot of federal assistance, but, there continues to be a slowdown in soybean prices, milk prices, corn prices. And it seems, the struggles of ag country, that is an area that Trump carried very strongly in 2016. But a lot of those voters also swung the Democrats in 2018 to Tammy Baldwin. So I'm here in part to see, what they'll do in 2020. And the results are decidedly mixed so far.
Very interesting. Well, keep us updated, please, Jeff, as always.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on. Pleasure.
Yep.
Thanks,
of course.
guys.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.